Cam, a lot of men, when I talk to, they have this tendency to self-diagnose themselves with terms like porn addiction, premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction. I would like to know from you, why do men medicalize themselves like this? And also, what are some of the potential harm in doing this?
Yeah, this is something that I notice quite a lot, mate. And I think partly it's because we don't have a lot of language to talk about our sexual experiences as men. Like we don't really get a lot of encouragement to talk with other people and other men in our lives about our sexuality, our sexual function, our experiences of pleasure. And so we kind of just have, as lay people, adopted clinical language, right? Because it's the only language that's really available, like, calling ourselves addicts or calling ourselves, self-diagnosing with premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction. Those are clinical diagnoses with criterion that you have to meet in order to have them. And yet we don't really have anything else to describe our experience. So I like to use the term erectile disappointment instead of erectile dysfunction. I like to talk about, coming before you want to, rather than having premature ejaculation. I like to talk about, your relationship with porn rather than being a porn addict. So there's ways of articulating your experiences that don't have to pigeonhole you into having a clinically diagnosable problem. So I think that's one reason, is because we don't have the language. And so adding into our vocabulary is really important. I think another reason why is because we, the language that we do get comes from pharmaceutical companies, essentially, right? Like a lot of the people that are advocating for more awareness around premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction, for example, are pharmaceutical companies or companies that sell pharmaceuticals. Exactly. So, for example, you've got the rise of Viagra from the company Pfizer in the 1990s and the 2000s was pushing erectile dysfunction into people's faces with all their advertisements and the amount of money they were spending on what I might loosely call propaganda. They were telling men who maybe didn't have erectile dysfunction, who maybe just struggled with their erections every now and again, that no, they had erectile dysfunction. And so we kind of broadened the umbrella of the way that we conceptualized erectile dysfunction. And this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but I'll sum this up as quickly as I can. So erectile dysfunction specifically, the questionnaire that we use, which is a 5-item questionnaire to diagnose erectile dysfunction as clinicians, and I'm not a clinician, I should say, but I know this about the questionnaire because I've spoken to clinicians and done the research, is that they kind of ask you about your distress levels, about reliability, things like that. But that 5-item questionnaire, which again, asking someone 5 questions to see if they've got erectile dysfunction seems like a very under subpar way of doing it, but when we're talking about population prevalence, that's the item that's used, the 5-item questionnaire. That came from a longer 20-item questionnaire that got reduced down to 5 items. But that original 20-item questionnaire, which was created in 1993, I believe, was actually the creation of that questionnaire was funded by Pfizer at the time that they were also spending a lot of money, multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollars on erectile dysfunction medication advertisements. Absolutely. So we've got all this population prevalence data, which is from a questionnaire that was created by the same company that's trying to tell us that we need erectile dysfunction medication in the first place. So that's a whole problem in and of itself, right? In an ideal world, we'd be having physicians, clinicians, practitioners sit down with each individual person discussing their experiences of premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction, but we don't have that because that's impossible to do, right? To have those individualized, personalized experiences captured in large-scale data. So we use questionnaires. So there's an issue there with the way that we capture that information and then publicize it, right? We then say 80% of men have erectile dysfunction. Right. And that's because we've used, samples of 2,000 people. We've used that 5-item questionnaire. And then we just say, from there, we extrapolate and say 80% of the population. So guys go, holy shit, so many people have erectile dysfunction. I must have erectile dysfunction too. And they kind of fall into that trap. So I think that's also part of the reason why as well, in addition to the lack of vocabulary that we have to talk about our experiences. Yeah.
As you rightly said, most of the time it is just erectile disappointments because our penis won't behave the way we want to do it always, right? I mean, it has a mind.
Yeah.
It is subject to various stress and pressures which we experience in our day-to-day life. So I think that phrase comes from Chris Donahue, who's a sex therapist in America, and he likes to talk about the unrealistic expectations that we have of penises because of the pornography that we've seen for the most part. Yes. Right? That's the only reference point that we have for erections for a lot of guys. Absolutely.
You don't see any flaccid penises in pornography. You don't see the waxing and waning of erections. Absolutely. You don't get any information about the amount of pharmaceuticals that are used on set by male performers. And so the expectation then becomes way more unrealistic than than what it should be about like what our penis is supposed to do. And so guys that aren't hard immediately, you see penises kind of bouncing out of trousers in mainstream porn. If guys don't have that, or if they don't, have an erection for the whole duration of their sexual experience, which again is kind of unrealistic because blood flow has to move in and out of the penis. There's waxing and waning of tumescence and detumescence. That's fine. That's normal. But because we don't see that represented really anywhere, a lot of guys then go, oh, I must have erectile dysfunction. Again, I've got to go and see a pharmaceutical company. So it becomes this whole vicious cycle where when guys aren't talking about it, like having these conversations, they're not given an option for anything else.